It is a well-known fact that the most extraordinary events often begin with the most ordinary of things. This story is no different, for it begins not with a bang or a spell, but with a single, serene cow in a sun-drenched meadow. Her name was Bella, and she lived a life of beautiful, unthinking simplicity. She ate the sweet grass, drank from the clear stream and rested in the warm barn. She felt the sun on her back and the rain on her nose, and she asked for nothing more. She had no appointments to keep, no speeches to give, no crowns to wear. She simply was. And it was this very cow who would, in a most peculiar and profound way, become the mirror and the salvation for a princess named Annabel. The princess was the only child of King Reginald the Stern and Queen Seraphina the Grace, rulers of the prosperous and perpetually proper realm of Viridia. From the outside, her life was a perfect storybook etched in gold leaf. Castles of gleaming white stone pierced the clouds, gowns of silk and pearl lay draped over velvet chairs, and feasts that stretched for 12 courses filled the grand hall with laughter and music. But storybooks, as we know, rarely tell the whole truth. They don't speak of the weight of the ink. The truth of Annabel's life was a schedule, penned in flawless, unyielding script on vellum, dictating every hour from her dawn awakening to her moonlit retirement. It was a life of posture and decorum, of shoulds and musts. A princess must be poised, her governess would say, tightening the laces on her dress. A princess must be eloquent, her tutor would insist, correcting the faintest stumble in her recitation of royal lineage. A princess is a symbol, not a child, her father would gently but firmly remind her when she was caught gazing too long from the window. She was a songbird in a gilded cage, and though the cage was magnificent, she had forgotten the sound of her own song. Her only refuge, her only stolen moments of true freedom, came from the quiet kindness of a young farmhand named Leo. He was a boy of the earth, with straw in his hair and soil under his nails, and he possessed a wisdom that never found its way into royal decrees. He saw the loneliness that lingered in her eyes like a faint mist during her formal weekly inspections of the royal grounds. On days when the weight of her crown seemed to bow her neck, he would wait by the old oak, and with a glance that asked a silent question, he would receive an almost imperceptible nod in return. Then, he would lead her away from the manicured paths, through a hidden gap in a hedge of blooming lavender that smelled of pure, simple sweetness. It was there, in the honest confines of the royal dairy, that she first saw Bella. The princess would stand at the wooden fence, her fine slippers sinking into the soft earth, and she would watch. She watched the slow, steady rhythm of the cow's breath, the peaceful, hypnotic flick of her tail against the flies, the quiet, unjudging contentment in her large, liquid brown eyes. "She is more at peace than I have ever been," Annabel would whisper, her voice barely audible over the rustling leaves. And Leo, leaning on the fence post beside her, would simply nod. He understood more in that silence than any courtier with 1,000 words of flattery ever could. The great unraveling, the event that snipped the final taut thread of her composure, began on the evening of the grand ball of the Four Kingdoms. It was an event meticulously designed to showcase Princess Annabel to a visiting prince from a neighboring land, a boy with a perfectly trimmed beard and a smile that never reached his eyes. For weeks she had been prepared. The dress, a masterpiece of woven silver thread and moonstones, was so heavy it felt like a suit of armor. The dance steps, practiced 1,000 times in the silent ballroom with a stern-faced instructor, felt foreign and clumsy under the gaze of hundreds. The air was thick with the scent of perfume and expectation. She could feel the eyes of the court, of her parents, of the foreign prince, like pinpricks on her skin. She was a butterfly pinned to a velvet board, beautiful and utterly paralyzed. And then it happened. As she descended into the final deep curtsy, the intricate, famously heavy headpiece of diamonds and sapphires, the heirloom of Seraphina, worn by every queen for 10 generations, caught on the prince's ornate ceremonial sash. There was a terrible, sharp sound of tearing thread and straining metal, and then a crash that silenced the entire orchestra. The headpiece tumbled to the polished marble floor, shattering into 1,000 glittering, worthless pieces. The gasp that rippled through the ballroom was louder than any thunder, more crushing than any avalanche. In that moment of supreme, spectacular humiliation, surrounded by a sea of shocked, pitying, and secretly amused faces, the last thread of Annabel's composure snapped. She didn't cry. She didn't run. She didn't scream. She simply went still, her eyes losing their focus on the world of crystal and gold, and turning inward towards a quieter, greener place. She walked out of the ballroom, a silent, silver-clad ghost moving through a tableau of stunned silence. She walked past the confused guards who were too startled to stop her, down the endless marble stairs, through the manicured gardens where the roses seemed to mock her with their perfect, thorny beauty, and straight to the lavender-hidden entrance of the dairy. Leo found her there an hour later, curled in a nest of fresh, sweet-smelling straw beside the warm, solid bulk of Bella. Her crown was discarded in the hay like a piece of old harness. Her fine dress was smudged with earth and torn at the hem. She looked up at him, and her eyes, for the first time in years, were clear and calm, devoid of fear or duty. She plucked a blade of hay from the ground and held it in her mouth, chewing thoughtfully. "The grass is sweet today," she said, her voice a soft, contented murmur, devoid of its royal cadence. And then, she lowered her head and began to quietly graze on the clover at her feet. Princess Annabelle was gone. In her place was a creature who believed, with every fiber of her being, that she was a cow. The chaos that erupted in the castle when Leo, pale-faced and stammering, delivered the news to the king and queen was a storm of a different kind. King Reginald's first reaction was denial. "Nonsense. She is overwrought. A fit of vapors. Fetch the smelling salts." But when they saw her, their daughter, their heir, kneeling on all fours and lowing softly to Bella, the reality of the situation crashed down upon them. Queen Seraphina let out a choked sob and fainted clean away. The king, his face a mask of purple fury and profound confusion, roared for the royal physicians. The first to arrive was Dr. Ponder, a man whose intellect was matched only by the size of his belly. He carried a bag of polished brass instruments, all clicks and whirs. "A clear case of acute hysterical transference," he declared, attempting to take the princess's temperature with a device she promptly tried to eat, mistaking it for a metal carrot. He then tried to engage her in a game of chess, reasoning that logic would restore her senses. She knocked the board over with a placid swing of her head and went back to chewing her cud. Next came the royal mage Alaric the Azure, whose beard was threaded with actual, sparkling starlight. He spoke of humors misaligned with the lunar cycle, and a curse woven from spider silk and sorrow. He burned herbs that made the barn smell like a festival and chanted words so old they had forgotten their own meaning. The Princess Annabelle merely blinked her large, calm eyes and swished her tail, utterly unimpressed by his arcane theatrics. The magic fizzled out, leaving only the smell of burnt sage and failure. The weeks turned into a strange, new kind of calendar. The court adjusted as courts do to the absurd. The king's decrees were now issued from the barn door. The queen took to weeping quietly into a lace handkerchief while sitting on a milking stool. They tried everything. They brought her favorite foods, sugared violets, honeyed cakes. She sniffed at them and turned away, preferring the fresh clover Leo brought her daily. They brought her a new crown even more magnificent than the last. She used it as a trough for her water. They read to her from books of law and poetry. The sound of the words seemed to wash over her like a distant stream, meaningless and faint. And through it all there was Leo. While the court saw a catastrophe, Leo saw a person who had finally found peace. He became her primary caretaker. He would lead her to the meadow each morning, his hand gently on her shoulder, speaking to her in a low, soothing voice. "The sun is warm on your back today, Annabelle. The clover is thick by the old stone wall." He never argued with her belief. He entered into it with her. He made sure she had the sweetest hay, the cleanest water. He brushed her hair, which she now allowed him to do for hours as if he were grooming her. In those quiet moments, a new understanding began to dawn on the few who watched, the stable hands, the dairy maids. They saw that the princess was not ill in the way a fever is ill. She was, in her own way, healed. The frantic, anxious light in her eyes was gone, replaced by a bottomless, bovine calm. It was during this time of uneasy truce that the real trouble began to stalk the kingdom of Viridia. A strange blight appeared in the eastern farmlands. It was not a pest or a drought, but a creeping grayness. The grass did not die, it simply lost its vitality, becoming pale, tasteless, and brittle. The cows who ate it gave less milk, milk that was thin and blue. The blight was slow, insidious, and it was spreading west towards the capital. The king's advisors were baffled. They sent for soil experts and botanists from distant universities. They proposed complex irrigation systems and alchemical fertilizers that cost a fortune and did nothing. The grayness crept on. Fear, a scent more potent than any perfume, began to permeate the castle. One afternoon, as Leo led Annabelle through a part of the meadow that was still green, she stopped. She refused to eat the lush grass before her. Instead, she strained towards a patch of the gray, blighted grass at the very edge of the healthy field. She lowered her head and began to graze upon it with apparent relish. Leo, horrified, tried to pull her away. "No, Annabelle, not that. It's no good." But she was stubborn. For the first time she resisted him, planting her feet and continuing to eat the gray grass with a soft, contented moo. It was then that Leo noticed something. Where she had cropped the gray grass, tiny vibrant green shoots were already pushing their way through the soil from the roots beneath. It was as if her grazing was somehow stimulating the earth, telling it to wake up, to remember its true nature. He fell to his knees, digging his fingers into the soil. It was cool and moist, not dry and dead as the experts had claimed. The problem wasn't the soil itself but the top layer, which had become choked and stagnant. The princess, in her simple bovine wisdom, was not eating the blight. She was pruning it, triggering the land's own capacity to heal. He ran to the king, bursting into the throne room with straw in his hair and hope in his heart. "Your Majesty," he cried, forgetting all protocol. "The princess, she knows. She knows how to fix the blight." The king, older and wearier than he had been months ago, looked at the frantic farmhand. "Boy, my daughter believes she is a bovine. What could she possibly know?" "Everything," Leo insisted. "She won't eat the good grass. She's only eating the gray grass. And where she eats, the green returns. She understands the land in a way we don't. We've been trying to fight it. She's just living with it. And by living with it, she's healing it." There was a long, heavy silence. It was the sound of a kingdom's worldview cracking. To trust the instinct of a girl who thought she was a cow over the learning of his finest minds? It was madness. But the king looked at the desperate hope in Leo's eyes and remembered the profound peace in his daughters. The old ways had failed. Perhaps it was time for a new kind of wisdom. "Very well," the king said, his voice heavy with the weight of an extraordinary decision. "We will do it her way." And so, the next day, a most peculiar procession left the castle. King Reginald and Queen Seraphina, in their royal finery, walked behind their daughter, Princess Annabelle, who was led gently by Leo. Behind them came the entire royal herd of cattle, bells softly clinking. They marched to the edge of the blight, a vast expanse of gray that stretched towards the horizon. Leo let go of Annabelle's shoulder. She looked out at the field, sniffed the air, and then, with a soft, determined low, she stepped forward onto the gray grass and began to graze. One by one the other cows followed her, instinctively following their new, strange leader. It was not an instant miracle. It was slow, patient work. Day after day, Annabelle and the herd cropped the gray, stagnant grass. And day after day, as the sun rose and set, the green returned. It spread from the west, a tide of life following in the wake of the believing princess and her loyal herd. The kingdom was saved, not by a sword or a spell but by a different way of seeing the world. Princess Annabelle never fully returned to her old self. She did not suddenly put on a crown and start giving royal decrees. The belief had become her truth, and it was a truth that had, quite literally, saved the kingdom. A new balance was found. She took up residence in a beautiful, open-aired pavilion built between the palace gardens and the meadow. She would often attend court functions, usually sitting peacefully on a cushion of fresh hay, her presence a quiet, grounding force. When ambassadors came with complex problems, the king would often say, "Let us walk in the meadow." And seeing his daughter's calm, unhurried existence, the solution would often present itself, not in a flash, but in a slow, growing understanding. Leo became the royal steward of the lands, his earthy wisdom valued as highly as any scholar's. And as for the kingdom of Viridia, it learned a new kind of strength, the strength that comes from stillness, the wisdom that speaks without words, and the profound truth that sometimes, to find yourself, you must first be brave enough to become something else entirely. And they all lived, not exactly happily ever after, but contentedly, and in a peace that was as deep and as enduring as the roots of the earth below.